Buonasera, hello world. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and live on the Global Village. Uh, Monday night webinars. Welcome to the third Monday night webinar hosted by Paolo Granata for a community of friends and folks in the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group and on the YouTube channel, the McLuhan Institute YouTube channel, kindly provided by Andrew McLuhan. Hello, Andrew. I think you are on. Hello. That's great. So, Monday night webinars, PandeMedia and Folklores from the lockdown age. This is the subtitle for this series. We are keen to explore and understand who we are, what matters to us in this state of emergency. And also we wanted to, balance. There's a state of isolation and getting together, gathering virtually on our social media in order to exchange ideas, in order to really make sense of what's going on around us today. And so, welcome. I see some comments coming. Let me just start warming up a little bit before introducing our special guests for tonight. I see already some comments. I'm going to take this. Here we are. Oh, Andrew McLuhan from Facebook and YouTube. Abdul from Berlin. That's right. That's very kind of you, Abdul. I think it's 2 a.m. in Berlin, in Europe. But, we are in a global village and time zone doesn't matter anymore. So thank you, Abdul from Berlin. Bob Bleachman, thank you, from Forest Hills in New York. Sparrow TV, Ottawa, great. Andres from Manatee, Las Tunas, Cuba. Wow, I think it's the first time from Cuba. So thank you for joining us. So it's nice to see you all. It's a great community. Steve, thank you, Steve, for sending and sharing something. Probably tonight we will share your insight. Steve, Ellie, Danielle, hi from Ottawa. Yes, please keep saying hi and say where you are right now. So where are you in this moment? Vuk from Sarajevo. Wow, from the Facebook, from the YouTube channel. That's absolutely great. So I can pick your comments from both the Facebook Marshall McLuhan's group and the YouTube the McLuhan Institute channel. I can pick up your comments and bring you in the conversation. This is very important, okay? Because this is not just a conversation among a panel, among some speakers or guests. This is a frank, honest, and open conversation with you all, my friends, okay? So feel free to comment, feel free to send your questions for our guests, and then we will have the pleasure of enjoying dialogues and conversations that really matter today in the state of isolation. So we need to retrieve the pleasure of conversation, isn't it? We are isolated, but not alone, and this is important. We need opportunities and platforms for sharing ideas. And in the meantime, Ray Daly from Virginia, US, Rodrigo Barbosa from Brazil. Rodrigo, ciao Rodrigo. Mateus from Brazil. Clinton from Ottawa. Well, I see many Ottawans. Is that correct? Ottawans here, okay. And Rhea. Oh, hello, Rhea. Hello. That makes me think that it's time for an announcement before introducing our guest speakers for tonight. I wanted to show you the next Monday night webinar guests. We have a nice lineup of guests with Ria Beaumont, Ramona Pringle, R.H. Thompson, and Barry Wacker. So every night, every Monday night, 3-4 friends and guests and colleagues will share ideas. But again, you all, my friends at home, folks, are invited to join. Share your comments, brief questions, brief comments on YouTube or on Facebook, and then I'll be very glad to pick you some of them. And by the way, my apologies if I won't be able to pick all of them. I will be in a kind of a multitasking mode because I need to follow the stream, the comments and chat and cameras. So I will seem a little bit distracted. I'm not. I'm just multitasking. I don't like multitasking. However, that's the modality for this Monday night webinars. But it's a great pleasure. And also, let me point out, it's a very relaxed situation. So it's friendly, it's informal. I really wanted to connect to the Marshall McLuhan's community, the media ecology community, international community. We are getting ready for the Media Ecology Annual Convention that, of course, will be online this year. So it will be a virtual convention. So again, a community of friends in the McLuhan's community, the media ecology, and so on, to gather and share ideas. Okay, so feel free to step in. And by the way, I wanted to make an experiment tonight because I'm able to bring some of you with your video and camera, if you wish, into the studio. Okay, so if you want to step in, send me a message on Messenger, ideally on Facebook Messenger. I can see your again, talking about multitasking. I will keep an eye on the Messenger, and so you can send me a private message if you want to step in somehow into our virtual broadcasting studio. All right, so save the date, next Monday night, the 18th, with a nice lineup of speakers. Then I wanted to say a few words again and say hi to Sparrow. Andrew Mir, hello. Andrew will be one of our guest speakers in a few weeks. And by the way, we are packed till July. Till July, we are packed. Sparrow again. Yep. Ottawa is here. And then Ray Daly. Facebook user. So you know what happens if you are on Facebook, because we are streaming on a private Facebook group, the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group, because it's a private group, it may happen something like this. So we don't see who you are. We don't see your beautiful face. We cannot see your name. So to avoid that, you can very simply and quickly just visit streamyard.com/Facebook. Okay, and authorize Facebook to just pick up your name and profile photo for the live streaming. Okay, so it's doesn't deal with your privacy settings. It's just the ability for StreamYard to pick up your name and photo profile and put it into the actual public streaming. Okay, so if you do that, streamyard.com/Facebook, we will be able to see who you are, where are you, and how are you in terms of your face. So please do it. Okay, streamyard.com/Facebook. And let me say hi. I see still a few friends, and then I'm going to, it's 10, perfect, 10 past 8, time to introduce our guest speakers. But firstly, let me say hi to John, the great John Caputo. Thank you for joining us. I see my guests. You can't see, but I see my guests doing some clapping or other movements. So that's great. Who else? Again, another anonymous user. Hi, Paolo. Hi, but I don't know who you are. So please authorize StreamYard to pick up your name and profile. Jean-François Vallée, another guest speakers in the upcoming weeks. Hello, Jean-François. David Nussbacken. Well, with David, we started a few years ago the series of Monday night seminars at the McLuhan Center. We had a lot of fun. It was a very informative and beautiful experience. So thank you, David, for joining us, and David Nussbacken as well, which is the president of the Marshall McLuhan Foundation. He will join us for a Monday night webinar in the following weeks. All right. And Julia Hildebrand. Hello, Julia. Hello, Julia. Great. And Julia as well will be joining us in a few weeks. Great. So I will stop here with comments and greetings. So it's time to introduce our guest speakers. In the meantime, you can see I will say hi to our backstage camera. I wanted to make it in a more engaging way. So this is again how we are setting the right mood. Okay, so I imagine you all around the world, late night in Europe, 2 a.m. in Berlin, or somewhere else in the world, joining together to rethink our global village in today's PandeMedia world. We like the idea of a PandeMedia, so how media environments can help us to make sense of this permanent state of emergency, and how we can make sense of it, how we can really learn from this situation. This is my core question, what we can learn from this situation. And so let's start presenting our first guest and friend for tonight, the Monday night webinar. She is a professor at the Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, media historian, author of many books and articles, a mentor, a researcher, a public speaker, but even most importantly, from a media perspective, not only she authored a marvelous book on the women that made the history of broadcasting in America, the Invisible Stars, a beautiful book on the history of women in broadcasting. But also, I just found out that she was not only a former radio consultant, but also a radio disc jockey, and best known for having discovered the Canadian rock band Rush. I have actually I have something to show you. The Canadian rock band Rush here, 40 million records plus them 40 years around. I think after Rolling Stones and Beatles, one of the most popular rock bands in Canada. And so our guest tonight is the person who actually discovered this famous Canadian band. So please join me welcome with a virtual round of applause into our Monday night webinar, Donna Halper. Donna, hello.
By the way, Andres, if you're still with us from Cuba, this is the first time we've ever seen each other. We've been writing to each other since forever. So thank you for coming on. This is so cool. When I was growing up, I could not have imagined that there would be a time and a place where we could be talking to people all over the world. This was like science fiction, you know? People predicted this, you know, but you never thought that this would actually happen. And it's just so amazing to be sitting here talking about media ecology, talking about the late, great Neil Postman, my cultural hero, or talking about anything with people from so many different places. When McLuhan was writing about radio, he talked about in understanding media. He talked about how radio is the most intimate medium. It's like eavesdropping on the world. And yet here we are online. And to some degree we are eavesdropping on the world. But I got to tell you, if you want to compare, one of the fun things about being a media historian, my book, Invisible Stars, was not just about women in radio or women in television. It was about changing attitudes about women in the public sphere, women as newsmakers, women having agency, women speaking for themselves rather than just being spoken about. And so I hold in my hand a 1952
Oh
TV
wow,
guide, okay? 1952. What's
1952. This
become
time.
of the women wrestlers?
Ah, so
Because in 1952, the big scandal was whether you were going to have women wrestlers, because it might destroy the public morality if they saw women wrestlers. And so in some cities, they banned the women wrestlers. Now, come on, it's all fake, blah, blah, blah. But people were entertained by the women wrestlers and by the men wrestlers. And when I was growing up, this was a big deal. And the fact that they banned them, I'm sitting here today, it's 2020, almost anything is available anywhere. You can find whatever you want. And it's kind of amusing to go back to a time and a place when decision makers were actually trying to decide what was or was not moral for you to watch or listen to. How things have changed.
well, no, I'm glad you brought this up. In those years, early 50s, Marshall McLuhan was writing and publishing The Mechanical Bride, right? By the way, so that maybe
Oh, yeah.
we will come back to that, and it's nice that also that you are pointing out how these virtual meetings online, it seems fabulous. The opportunity for sharing ideas instantaneously, and well, before the pandemic crisis, online streaming was one of the most boring stuff in internet. Now it's super cool. All people are streaming online. We too, actually. So you see how things have changed completely, and our perception. So we will talk more about that. So thank you, Donna, for joining us. Thank you, Donna. And let me move on to our next guest speaker and friend for tonight's Monday night webinar. So it's a great pleasure to have with us a futurist speaker, if I may. Maybe then we will talk about futurism and future and foresight thinking. I think that foresight thinking is a better term to describe this our guest speaker, not only a foresight thinker but also a researcher, an internet strategist, an experienced innovator and collaborator, and with a lot of experience in broadcasting TV, internet, and the way of gathering people together. In fact, talking about Marshall McLuhan, back in 2011, this our friend, our next guest speaker, started one of the most interesting initiatives ever undertaken in Toronto. It was back in 2011. It was the Marshall McLuhan centenary, and at the Toronto Public Library, the Toronto Reference Library in Toronto, our friend, our next guest speaker, organized a series of McLuhan salons open to the city under the banner, under the title of the City as a classroom, which is a Marshall McLuhan's catchphrase. There is a book for that. And by the way, so now we are using streaming as a live streaming as a classroom, by the way. But when we were able to still gather in person, I'll show you a little clip. I'm experimenting with some special broadcasting effect. I will share a short 30 seconds clip about the our city as a classroom back in 2011, Toronto Reference Library, to celebrate the Marshall McLuhan centenary. Enjoy.
The biggest influence that had on me, which got me now going into my master's, was Marshall McLuhan and his famous quote, "The medium is the message."
You know, we're not here to do a lecture on McLuhan. We're not here to do a panel presentation. You know, let's be frank. I wasn't even here when the guy was alive. So clearly I need help to really understand what Toronto was like, what Toronto became in all its many cultures.
Well, understanding what Toronto is through the lens of Marshall McLuhan's prescient insight. And so he's with us tonight, Jesse Hirsh. Hello, Jesse. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was
hello.
It feels so long ago. It was what, less than a decade ago, and it feels like it was in another world.
Another world. It's very weird to see those people gathering together in this moment. Oh, well, I was there actually. I was there as a visiting professor back in 2011 for a few months. I spent a few months in Toronto, and I was there. So in the McLuhan salons, and well, we will talk more about the idea of city as a classroom. So the idea of conceiving our urban environment, and maybe rethinking the urban environment in light of this current crisis, rethinking the way we interact with our urban environment. And because I know you no longer live in the urban centers, but you wanted to enjoy the beautiful landscape of the Canadian natural heritage, we will also talk about probably so the difference between these different situations. In fact, where are you now? Where are you now, Jesse?
So I'm in Lanark County, which a number of our Ottawa participants would recognize, as it's in the Ottawa Valley. I'm about 55 minutes west of Ottawa in Ontario, on really an interesting part of geography where the Canadian Shield, which is all rock, meets the Ottawa Valley, which is really fertile. Right. So it's an interesting ecosystem. And, you know, ironically, my practice of futurism, or my practice of foresight, led me to the conclusion that the future is rural. And so about 18 months ago, I decided to flee Toronto. I often call myself a refugee from Toronto. And I am grateful at this moment in time that I did that, because physical distancing in the country is a whole lot easier than it is in the city.
It's a permanent mood, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, you asked me to bring an object to kind of represent where I'm at right now.
Let me see.
And it's this egg produced by my chickens. And so food security and being close to your food supply also feels like a pretty good relationship to have right now, especially on a media level. So I'm grateful that my path worked out as it did, that I'm here right now during this particular crisis.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Jesse. And thank you also for reminding that, yes, I've been asking our guest speakers to bring, what is mine? I didn't bring somewhere, to bring an object, a prop, a specific symbolical object to represent this current state. And I think we are, again, rediscovering the value of material things. So how important are the symbolical objects to make sense of staying at home, isolated. So things matter. Sometimes they are living entities. I like the idea that things are living entities. It's almost a living entity because it's an egg. So it was at least a living entity. So thank you for reminding this, and we will share a few thoughts about our companions, right? So the objects as companions for this very important moment. So thank you, Jesse. Let me finish the merry-go-round of our speakers, and then I'll be back to you, okay? All right. So here we are. Let me, in the meantime, say just a quick hi to Elaine Khan. She will join us in the following weeks. Phyllis from New Hampshire. And then Barry Wacker. I told you next week Barry will be with us directly from Philadelphia, downtown Philadelphia. And here you see, okay, Andrew started already probing, experimenting with language. Andrew McLuhan said sitting as a classroom. that's great. We are sitting as a classroom. And there is a nice hello from South Australia. But again, you see anonymous Facebook user. That makes me able to remind. So please, because we are streaming on a private Facebook group, so please be reminded to authorize StreamYard to pick up your photo and name. So basically, just visit streamyard.com/Facebook and then click yes. All right, so it will mean no invasion of your privacy. It's just picking up name and photo, so to show up on our comment stream. Otherwise, you look like an anonymous visitor. Okay. In the meantime, Bernadette, welcome back. Bernadette, Daniel, welcome back, Daniel. From where are you, Daniel? You get an haircut? No haircut, unfortunately. I think it will take a little while to make an haircut. So no, it's all good. This is a typical quarantine haircut. Naim from Montreal. Thank you. Alex Kuskis. And say hello to Junichi Miyazawa. Yes, I will. Junichi from Japan will join us as a special guest in a few weeks. And Sal Greco is watching. Again, Sal, authorize streamyard.com/Facebook to pick up your name. Is watching all the way from Toronto. All right, my friends. Great to see you. But let me move on and to introduce our guest speakers. It's 8:28, so I'm running slightly late than usual, but it's nice. I told you already since the beginning of our first Monday night seminar, lockdown equals slow down. So I don't want to rush. Okay, so we'll take it easy, but making a very formative discussion, and in fact to inspire conversations, informative discussion from Toronto, teaching at Guelph University. Our next guest speaker and friend and colleague, he was he won an award in the Media Ecology Association some years ago, and a professor in the School of English and Theatre Studies at the University of Guelph, the author of a marvelous book, my students like it, the Research Write Create, Connecting Scholarship and Digital Literacy, Digital Media, a great book to explore how digital media can interconnect with the way we undertake humanistic research. A great book, and many other books on the idea of media education, media literacy, and many other very cool stuff. And you will see tonight there is a fil rouge that connects our guest speakers. I'll try to discover and find out and connecting the dots. I think a kind of artistic sensitivity, artistic sensibility is a fil rouge that overlaps among our guest speakers. And so please join me welcome with a virtual round of applause from Toronto, actually, but teaching at the University of Guelph. From Toronto, where are you? Mark Lipton.
Hi.
Hello, Mark. Hello.
Hi, how's everyone doing? It's interesting for me that a lot of my early work in media ecology began around public health and media literacy for disease prevention and health promotion, particularly around tobacco use. And now a lot of the lessons that I learned around media literacy and health messaging are really coming to the fore in today's era of information, misinformation, health information, knowing the facts, and knowing how to respond is it's these are challenging times. It's also overwhelming to see all of the people who are watching. Hello, world! What an interesting sort of re-tribal experience. I've been in lockdown, it feels like, for so long that I forget there's a bigger world out there. So thank you very much for having me, Paolo. And I look forward to whatever you've got for us tonight.
We'll see. We're a kind of a free discussion. And thank you, Mark, for joining us. It's a great pleasure. And it's been since a while where we didn't see each other. So thank you for joining us. And well, again, so we will explore and spend some time together. And by the way, talking about it together, I said I put here a note, exploring the togetherness. I wanted to retrieve this very word, the togetherness in this state of isolation. What does togetherness mean, right, to us in this very particular moment? So think about this, Mark, and I will be back to you soon. Okay,
I'm ready for you.
All right, great. And in the meantime, we have a few very good vibrations. Oh, a great hi to Mark from Megan. Megan, hello, how are you? Megan was, I think you are the same, Megan, for the Toronto School Conference. You have been one of the volunteers for that conference. And of course, she said, amazing professor and friend. Confirmed, correct, absolutely. Mark is amazing friend and professor. So thank you for pointing this out to Megan, and thank you for joining us again. So that's great. And because we are almost done with our friends and speakers, finally, a friend, a former president of the Media Ecology Association, a long-standing scholar in the field of media environment, interested in relationship between music, media, and well, I'm very active, I told you already, in the Media Ecology Association. I think we have a few special surprises talking about music today. And his last book, let me just put a note here, Radiohead, Music for a Global Future, published by our friend and scholar and inspirer of thoughts and discussions in the Media Ecology Association. So please join me. Welcome, Phil Rose.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Paolo. Thank you very much, Paolo, for everything you do. You create so much opportunities for interaction and fellowship, and I'm sure it's only the beginning. I'm sure in the years to come we'll see much more, because you've got lots of energy and lots of ideas.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And energies and ideas, actually, it comes from you all. It comes from the folks following. So I just ignite the fire. Okay, I just spark the fire. But then the real actual wood, it's all of you joining me. So that's absolutely very kind of you. But I want to point out that we are a community. Okay, I'm just igniting the fire. Where are you right now, Phil?
I am ensconced in Hamilton, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
So just kitty corner on the lake to yourself and Mark and some of the other people who join us. If there are people from out of town, so to speak, if you were going from Toronto to Niagara Falls, you'd have to go through Hamilton to get there. So just to give you a sense of where that is located.
All right, great, great. And so, thank you again for joining. I like to start the conversation addressing our main core question for tonight. So the idea that we are learning. So we are at home. We are learning how to make sense of this brand new situation. I like to point out one of the Marshall McLuhan's quotes we are retrieving for this series. The first one is, "The future is not what it used to be." Yeah, it is actually an unexpected future. We couldn't really figure out. We couldn't really expect this kind of present we are experiencing. But a more inspiring Marshall McLuhan's quote is breakdown as breakthrough. Last week, Derek the Kirkov brought this very quote, and so the idea that yes, there is a breakthrough. There is something we are learning, something we are making sense of, something that's a lesson we are learning from the current scenario. And then I wanted to start with my first two speakers, Donna and Jesse. Donna first and then Jesse. In a nutshell, what are the lessons you, Donna, are learning from this current scenario?
Well, actually, the thing about breakdown and breakthrough, there's a line. I used to be a DJ, so I think in songs, okay? I mean, it's sometimes I'll just hear a song and go, oh yeah, I played that. So there's a line in a song by Semisonic called Closing Time. It was a hit a few years ago. You'd know it if you heard it. And it's got a line that says, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. So we're thinking like, oh, it's over now. And actually, it isn't over now. There's this continuum, and we're just learning how to adapt to it. So I'm thinking that what Sherry Turkle said about the power of conversation, a couple of years ago, you may recall, if you were at the Media Ecology Association, Turkle told a wonderful story about how she took her kids on vacation and they're all sitting on a couch and they're all texting and they're sitting next to each other and they're not talking to each other. They're just texting. I have the feeling that one of the things that this moment has done for us is it's forced us to get back into communication with each other. It's forced us to talk to each other, whether we're Zooming or Skyping, whether we're going old school and just talking on the phone. I don't know about you, but I'm getting back into contact with people that I haven't talked to in ages. And so, yeah, what we knew before, that's over. But what we're creating now, that's really building on what we knew before, but just kind of repurposing it. Does that make any sense at all?
Well, and I would follow up your lyric with one of my favorite Bobby Dylan lines of those not busy being born or busy dying. And I think that we're in that kind of demand for resilience. But at the same time, to maybe refer to what Mark alluded to earlier and set him up to respond, I've been worrying about the consequences of echo chambers. And, I kind of felt before the crisis, it was something we could tolerate. We could even indulge in and say, I really only want to connect with people who think like me. And yet what I'm really frustrated about right now is the public health agency's inability to get through to certain echo chambers. And I even had a conversation with someone today and said, if I was the head of US public health, if I was the head of Canadian public health, I'd hire Howard Stern. Because Howard Stern is the kind of media professional that's demonstrated consistent success at reaching the people that public health officials right now are not reaching. And, whether these are the folks demanding a reopening or whether these are the folks flouting, the notion that we should be wearing masks in public. To your point that this is going to be a very long process, I think part of the reason it's going to be a very long process is because the general public health education hasn't really been as effective as it needs to be.
But there's something else to consider too, okay? And that is misinformation travels at the speed of light these days, okay? Years ago, if you or I said something crazy, which our students probably think we do on a regular basis, but if you or I said something crazy, the only people that knew about it were you, our students, maybe our spouses, and that was pretty much it. Or you could get up on a soapbox and go out in the middle of, a park and just, God rest the soul of Jerry Stiller, I've got a lot of problems with you people, and now you're going to hear about it. But the only people that really did hear about it were the people that were in our general environment. Today, somebody can get online, make a crazy statement about the virus. It travels to everybody's followers. It gets into the echo chamber, the people on Fox News, the people on MSNBC. I'm not equating the two. I'm just saying that people are like, they're in their little cocoons. And it becomes so easy. Confirmation bias is running rampant. And this is one of the downsides of our new lightning fast communication. On the one hand, you and I are having this conversation, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, some of the people that need to hear it might not be participating. And yeah, we could ask Howard Stern to do it, but that's an old story too. The public have always loved hearing what celebrities had to say. And 9 times out of 10, what they had to say was not exactly life-changing, but it was entertaining at least.
I cite Howard Stern only as a historical example, but I think to your point, we're dealing with the problem of the vernacular.
Yep.
How many public health officials use language and metaphors that are accessible to a large enough part of the audience versus the conspiracy theorists, the people who craft those highly infectious memes and viruses that, to your point, get amplified at the speed of the web. Public health officials should be learning some of those tactics.
But this
is recognizing
the
the affordances of the platforms, the affordances of the networks, and employing the same advanced levels of media literacy as their opponents are. Because this is the information warfare that Marshall McLuhan described.
This is what the late, great Neil Postman warned us about in his seminal book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I'm saying that because, we're all familiar with it, but there are various people tuning in that are like, go read Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's as relevant now as it was when Neil Postman first wrote it. Television, show business, everything is entertainment. We have a president who's an entertainer. We have a government that's people are trying to be entertaining rather than informative. And we need a scientist who's entertaining. Bill Nye, the science guy. I mean, we need people with personas who can get out there, professional wrestlers. I mean, somebody that just can get the message across, because the public have become so accustomed with all of the stimuli being thrown at them. What breaks through seems to be what's the most entertaining. And you're right, Jesse. The anti-science crowd have very much learned how to be more entertaining. Pseudoscience is entertaining. The real answer, which is often, we're not sure yet, isn't as entertaining as, take this pill and you'll be fine. I know you might be dead, but people are looking for instant answers, and the anti-crowd very often has them, whereas the pro-crowd is kind of like, hey, a little critical thinking here? That's a lot of work. I don't want the critical thinking part. So bring on Howard Stern. Howard is brilliant. He really is. I worked with him many years ago when neither one of us were famous. He's very good at cutting through the BS. But we really need some scientists who can speak, you're right, the vernacular, who can speak the language. I find even we as professors very often get caught in the theoretical, and all around us, people are falling asleep. And we need to keep them awake so that they can understand politics as entertainment. But that's where we are right now. People have an expectation that it will be entertaining, and entertaining isn't always informative. Donna, you talk too much. I'm sorry.
No. You have to
Take me
not to
anywhere.
be sorry. Absolutely, and it reminds me the idea of a brave new world. So the idea that even Neil Poston, right, wanted to point out how this overwhelming diet of entertaining can really overload our ability of critical thinking, the ability of using our imagination. And it comes to my mind recently the World Economic Forum, and many other actually critics described today's state of crisis as and particularly the lockdown, as the biggest psychological experiment ever undertaken, the biggest psychological experiment. I wanted to bring in the discussion, Mark, about this. So the idea that we are making sense of this, again, the biggest psychological experiment globally, because technically 2.6 billions of people currently are experiencing a lockdown somehow, right? And so never happened in the history of humanity. That's why they call it the psychological experiment. I have also a special video, Mark. Maybe later, once you're okay, I can screen your video. But what's your take on the idea of what's the lesson we are learning from this biggest psychological experiment? Mark.
Well, I think we have to remember that it is through conflict that character is revealed. And this is a conflict that's unprecedented. Media change is moving at a speed that's unprecedented. And the world is experiencing trauma in a way that that's the sort of psychological experiment. Is all of a sudden everyone is pushed to their own sort of extreme. And like there's I don't agree, Jesse, that we need to call in Howard Stern. I actually think we need to step back even further and talk about like how do people like understand information, whether it's entertaining or not, right? Because like Viktor Frankl would say, between stimulus and response, there's that space, and that's where we have our power to choose how we want to respond. It's in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And most people aren't able to respond. They're completely reactive because their bodies are shut down. They don't know the difference between what they're feeling, what their bodies are sensing, the sensations, and it's learning to slow down is actually much more difficult. And I do think that this has happened before. We may not have had the messaging systems or the networked communication systems to know that everyone else was in lockdown. But I think most people lived in lockdown, and we look at the history of humankind. Certainly our early hominid ancestors would prefer to have been in lockdown than to be out on the floors of the jungle putting themselves at risk. So the idea that we're actually retrieving old behaviors here, I think, is very important to recognize. And the way that individuals deal with trauma are unique and particular, and we need to have a compassion, a sensitivity. Even though people might be following misinformation and engaging in incredibly dangerous behavior, I understand why. I hear them. I think that, in part, it's the echo chamber. I also like the filter bubble. The idea that it's not just that what's echoing in, it's just the world we think is global, but in fact, it's really quite limited. We do, we might be reaching out and connecting with old friends or using older communication modes, but the content is still pretty narrow. And the biggest challenge, I think, is for public health, as you say, Jesse, to engage with a range of publics. I've been interested in privacy, and I think, for a while, and trying to understand, what happens to privacy in this interconnected world. It seems that we've given up our privacy in exchange for publicity, and how publicity isn't the same as a public health campaign or education. Publicity is not educational. What makes something educational is the conversation that happens as a result of that publicity.
Yeah.
And so it's very important that we continue to have these conversations, saying things that we might not think you want to hear, or pushing the limits of what we can actually talk about, because we're also sort of afraid. Fear is one of the first things that we experience when we're in trauma, right? And I'm quite worried about what's going to happen as we move forward. I don't think there's any going back to any older ways of being. I think we have a whole new world in front of us, and we have no idea how to step forward. And mostly we're all in a state of shock, and we're either reactive or in shock. And so those are some of the things that I'm concerned about. And I'm really trying to have compassion for everybody at the same time as not be reactive. I need to model the behavior that I want others to have.
Yeah.
So those are a few things that I think we are in the midst of trying to understand. Is that?
Yeah, and talking about reactions, so thank you, Mark. I'm sure Jesse and Donna have some comments on as a reaction of what you just said. So briefly, Jesse, and then Donna.
So as someone who has very mild agoraphobia, I totally agree. There are some of us who are like, lockdown, yes! Everyone's got to stay in their place. I love it. But at the same time, I think in trying to defend my point about Howard Stern, it was Donna who brought up the entertainment side. I'm more interested in Howard as an interactive broadcaster. That he is fundamentally a broadcaster in the radio sense, but was able to achieve an interactivity that, given that public health officials are broadcasters, to look at interactive broadcasting in contrast to, say, the internet as an ecosystem was part of my point. And in particular, Howard was successful at that because I felt he really got into vulnerability. And a lot of his themes dealt with people who were dealing with trauma and people who were very afraid and paranoid about the world around them, because that was often the characters who would appear on Howard's show. I was never a Howard fan, but as a media scholar, very much recognized that he pioneered what is now YouTube, right? What is now a huge and broad genre of broadcast interactivity that I think speaks to some of the aesthetics and speaks to some of the qualities that I would like to see public health officials have. But I am empathetic with both of you in terms of the nature of misinformation and the speed of misinformation. And I absolutely agree, Mark, in terms of the distinction between an echo chamber and a filter bubble. that a filter bubble describes a far more agency and far more desire to control our relationship with the world and experience our relationship to the world. And that's where I almost feel confessional here in this forum in terms of being able to say, I love the fact that I'm isolated at home. I almost wish we could all be isolated at home more often, because media moderated reality is my preferred form, right? I'm not really comfortable dealing with people in person, but dealing with people in a mediated way is again far more closer to my wheelhouse. And in that regard, maybe I'm more compliant with public health officials because I believe in their vision of this, whereas others may. Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
No, it's my problem. I interrupt. It's a horrible habit. I've got the opposite problem. I'm basically very shy. Now, most people, I say that, they roll on the floor laughing because I'm a performer, I'm an entertainer, I'm a public speaker. Yeah, but those are my media. I'm a former DJ. I'm used to entertaining people. But left to my own devices, I'd be the person at the party sitting off in the corner somewhere, okay, hoping that nobody notices that I'm there. When I'm working, I'm the show, okay? And I don't mind being the show. I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm just saying, I'm for media. I'm used to it, okay? But in my personal life, very shy. And if I don't get out there, I lose what few social skills I have. So in a lockdown situation, I have an excuse to not engage, to not interact, to not notice verbal and nonverbal cues. And it's really important for people like me to be out there. I'm just going to let that sit there. I want to just take something off in a different direction. And then I notice Phil's on, and I really want to hear what Phil has to say. I want to throw something out at you guys. Political communication. Not just because I teach it, and not just because I was involved in politics for a while. I think the one thing that's different right now is it's an election year. And we have a candidate, a president, and I'm not trying to turn this political. He is not the first person to do this. He's just in the White House. And he has a lot invested in keeping people divided, keeping us and them, my group, my tribe, and the other group and the other tribe. Us good, them bad. We got to fight against them. And I find it problematic when the virus is referred to as a war and we're warriors, and just that whole articulation of everything as a battle with good guys and bad guys is partly the problem. The communication that I remember growing up, and again, there were no good old days. Come on. I grew up in the era of blatant anti-Semitism, when people could come right out and say to you, no, we're not going to hire you because you're a woman. No, I'm not idealizing the old days. I am saying, however, that I grew up in an era when presidents rose to the occasion. When if there was a crisis, I wasn't around for FDR, but I've heard some of the fireside chats. And I can imagine in the midst of the Great Depression, Republicans listening to those things and going, wow, I feel better now. I may not agree with him. He's not a Republican, but I feel better now. I don't listen to this president and feel better. I really feel like the communication that's being thrown at people increases their anxiety for political purposes. And that really worries me.
Great. And so, thank you, Donna. I like to bring in the discussion, Phil. Firstly, we had a few comments from our folks on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you very much for interacting. So it's 9 p.m. almost. Usually in the second portion of the Monday night webinar, we pick more questions. So please be brief and short to allow for bringing your comments into the discussion. And I still see some comments anonymous, so be reminded to authorize a StreamYard of picking up your face and profile. So a few comments from Facebook, and then I will give the room to you, Phil, for an impromptu comment. So Ray said, "Are people who had the virus them or us?" So we're still thinking about the idea of them and us, and so I wanted to get your comment on this. And also, you sent me something, Phil, a couple of days ago. You sent me something to foster discussion. So maybe then I can screen what you sent me. So, what's your take, Phil?
Well, I'll just respond quickly to a couple of things. Interesting that Donna and Jesse were talking about how much they enjoy the isolation and the state of affairs. And just to that, I guess I'm interested in the degree to which others are not capable of doing the same thing. That they're not necessarily as at ease with making use of whatever time in isolation they may have. And so that I think is connected to another thing maybe I can mention in a moment, but I also wanted to mention in relationship to Mark's comments about the difference between public relations and public health communication. And I think one of the things that's worth mentioning about the situation is just how unprecedented the situation is, and the degree to which the communication is developing in ways that it's not a fait accompli. They didn't declare a pandemic right away, obviously, because one, they're worried about being alarmist, but two, they had to see how the situation is developing, and so you get mixed messaging of the sort that we were referring to there with, is it okay to wear a mask? Is it better to wear a mask or not wear a mask? And I'm not even sure we still know whether that's the case or not. So to some extent, I think the communication of the public health concerns are difficult and a slightly different animal in the sense that it's unprecedented, but it's also constantly changing. And this is maybe where it may apply in terms of McLuhan's statement that the future is not what it used to be, because perhaps the future, when this occurs next time, we'll have much more knowledge, I think, and hopefully preparedness for this situation. So I just wanted to respond to that in terms about public health communication and whatnot. But I also am very interested in the other topics that have been spoken about, particularly misinformation. And I've been particularly surprised the degree to which people I grew up with, people that grew up in the same neighborhood as myself, and I'm sure others have this experience too, are among these people who are right on board with the conspiracy theories, etc. And the one thing that really concerns me the most is the degree to which people are unwilling to defer to expertise. And it's interesting because this, I think, is telling in a number of ways. I think it's an extension in one way of the attack on climate science and the inability of some to accept the general consensus of climate science. And it's interesting now that the American president's inability to spin this story in the same way they can spin other kinds of stories is interesting, and both also very dangerous in the sense that I think the medical community is the real last bastion of science. And it's one of the communities where science and applied science and ethics have all converged as most advanced, I think, which is why I see it as being very dangerous if those sort of authorities are being just questioned and not, deferred to. And it's interesting. I mean, the question of expertise and the epistemology of that goes all the way back to Protagoras and Plato, the dialogue.
Making our time.
One of the main kinds of.
Now, is that what you mean by
main kinds?
Phil, is that what you mean by referring to the Dunning-Kruger effect? You just sent me this. Actually, was an article on some legacy media. I don't remember, but basically, is that what you mean by the referring to the Dunning-Kruger effect? Very briefly, so we open up the discussion with our guests.
Yeah, to some extent, that is, about apparently well, just to be clear, that the Dunning-Kruger effect is essentially a statement of the fact that people don't know what they don't know, so they don't have enough knowledge to know that they don't know as much as, say, an expert in that realm of knowledge. And the important thing to consider about this effect is that it's not limited to individuals. I mean, we could amusingly remember that early McLuhan documentary where they're standing in the McLuhan kitchen and Michael McLuhan is talking about the capital of Brazil, and Marshall is insisting that it's Rio de Janeiro, whereas Michael is insisting that it's Brasilia. And of course, Michael was correct. So McLuhan in that particular instance, I think, was, displaying the Dunning-Kruger effect. And he probably expressed it a number of other times, illustrated it a number of other times. So yeah, it's part of this this inability to recognize that you're not capable of understanding the complexity of these areas of knowledge, and therefore it can easily be made into conspiracy sorts of material. And brought into doubt.
And you have various autocrats stepping in and using that. All over the world, there are right-wing movements. No offense to my right-wing friends. I'm not talking about moderate folks. I'm talking about autocracy. And where you have a president or a prime minister or a king saying, don't believe your lying eyes, only believe me. Only, if you can keep delegitimizing institutions like government, like the media, like scientists, if you can keep mocking experts and casting doubt and tell people you don't need critical thinking, you just need to believe, this is a very dangerous place we find ourselves in, and it puts even more responsibility on us as professors, as authors, oh my God, as experts, because people are being told, don't trust them, don't believe them. They can't be trusted, they can't be believed, only I, the leader, can be believed. That's a very dangerous message, and we're seeing it over and over.
Oh, and that's so dangerous, Donna. I'm really afraid of amplifying those stories of how to be in the world. We are living in dangerously fascistic times. And we have to remember that if you look at the adult literacy survey, about 24% of Americans and Canadians, to the same extent, don't pass the adult literacy test, meaning they could not read. It was from the Explorers, the former head of the Library of Congress. His name is on the tip of my tongue, but he was arguing that literacy is being able to read directions on a medicine bottle, again, like public health. And then there's another 25% or so of people who know how to read those directions, but they won't even though they know how to. So right away, 50% of the people just don't have the literacy skills to really know who to listen to or what messages make sense. Let me be very clear. These are very dangerous times. If you go out in public,
put on
wear a mask.
Because I don't think any of us are talking about deferring to expertise. I think we're talking about even considering expertise. If you're being told that expertise doesn't matter at all, that's the other extreme. Agreed, you need to question authority. But these authorities don't want to be questioned. And that's the opposite of what we've had. So I agree that some experts have let us down for sure. But taking the extreme that like don't even listen to experts, particularly about health, no offense, I'd rather listen to Tony Fauci when it comes to health than I would listen to Bolsonaro or one of those folks.
But the irony is that we live in the kind of diverse information ecosystem where people can choose to listen to who they will. Bingo. And for those of us with a high level of literacy, that's fantastic. And Phil, that's where I'll push back a bit, because I did not want in any way to convey that I like where we are right now and I like what's going on. I am quite the opposite. I share the, I think, consensus of the table that we are either in authoritarian times or pre-fascist times, or my, preference, the authoritarian surveillance complex that is rising. But I, at the same time, feel, to your point about medicine, and this was alluded to earlier, that we are currently participating in the greatest scientific experiment ever known to civilization, right? The collaboration that is happening right now is phenomenal. And that's where, Phil, I will also say, I'm fairly confident to say that I do know what we're supposed to be doing right now, and that's wear a mask anytime you go out into public, because this is a respiratory illness, and there's quite a bit of really well-respected scientific research available for all of us to look at that says wear a mask. And yet my local public health unit, which turns out there's members of our audience who are also part of the same area, is still telling people you don't need to wear a mask. So on Saturday, when I went to my local grocery store, and I went on Saturday at 6:30 p.m., foolishly thinking that no one else would be there, except turns out that all the guys who were day drinking and ran out of booze realized that the beer store and the liquor store were closed. So they were all at the grocery store, no masks, super spreaders, standing in line with just a six-pack, and me buying 2 weeks of groceries, and I'm the only person in a store wearing the mask. Even the staff aren't wearing masks. They're all using gloves and sanitizing the surface. And yet, when I go and look at the available medical research, I find that the disease isn't really transmitting from surfaces. No, it's airborne. It's a respiratory illness, and it's in indoor environments. So this is why I want public health officials to be consulting with experts who are experts in experts in interactive broadcasting, and experts in communicating in vernacular, and dare I say it, even memes, like crazy memes, and all sorts of creative ways that people are communicating. Why are public health agencies still using 20th century tactics when it comes to communicating with the public rather than getting with the times? That's why I think the regimes that exist today should be overthrown and replaced with democratic ones. Thank you and good night.
Hear, hear. I would only say they're 19th century tactics, not 20th century tactics.
As Neil Postman would say. Yes, very much
makes
so.
Sense.
Let's build a bridge to the 18th century.
All right.
There's a whole new sense of pandemic in the 18th century. I mean, are we entering the Dark Ages? Is that what this is about? Are we losing a sense of what's right and wrong, what's actual knowledge and what's just creative fiction? I don't know the answer. I have to say, these are very unsettling times. I wish I could go to work. I'm afraid. I'm afraid to be around other people. I'm afraid for my health. I'm afraid for the health of others. It's not something that I can just put aside. And it is not giving me time to reflect or get my work done. No, I'm mostly like pacing the house, pulling out my hair, as you can see, making a bigger mess of my world, because these are really scary times. And I don't want to dive into one of my work projects to forget about that. I need to, for my own self-preservation, keep my fears on edge, because I don't know. We don't know.
That to some degree, that's why what we're doing is really important. And I'm not saying that to stroke Paolo because he invited me and I appreciate it. But but seriously, we've become a culture where everybody thinks there's an answer. And sometimes there's just more questions. I mean, Neil Postman, I hate to keep referring back to him, but I really do dearly love the man. And he said people need to have a crap detector. He's right. And he also said one of the more important things that people can do is learn how to ask good questions. A lot of the time, the truth will emerge, whatever the truth is, but it will emerge out of questioning what's out there, what's being proposed as the solution or the answer. I think we need to come back to a place where people are exchanging ideas again. Back to the thing that we all said at the very, very beginning. One of the downsides of internet communication is that whole bubble, that whole confirmation bias, where I'm just talking to people who agree with me and talking to people that tell me that my ideas are just swell. One of the things I enjoy doing, and it's hard to do, but I still enjoy it, is I like to talk to people whose ideas and whose worldview are totally different from mine, because I always learn something. It doesn't have to be an argument. It doesn't have to be like, let's all call each other names. Sometimes it's just, yeah, we're probably not going to agree on this, but I'm really glad I understand your worldview a little bit better. Like, I've got a friend who's an evangelical Baptist. I'm your basic friendly Jewish feminist. And she sincerely believes I'm going to hell because I'm not a Christian. And yet we've been friends for 25 years. And I've had some incredible conversations with her. And I hope, if nothing else, she no longer thinks that all of us blue staters are just satanic. Maybe she thinks that we're human. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't run into a lot of evangelical Baptists in the circle of folks that I hang out with. So it's very enlightening for me. And I don't mean enlightening in a patronizing way. I mean enlightening like in, wow, I didn't know that's how you look at things. Because on the internet, we're all reduced to cartoons, okay? You go on Twitter and, oh, you're a this, yeah, but you're a that. And, Godwin's Law, quick, somebody calls someone a Nazi, But in conversation, it's like, okay, you sincerely believe X. And, you sincerely believe Y. And we're not going to change hearts and minds here, but maybe the best thing we can do is at least learn to respect each other's perspectives, and maybe there's some common ground that can come out of that.
I think that's really important, Donna. And I want to say, though, that, biology, we no longer believe that biology is destiny, because we know that the brain is massively plastic, and that we can all grow and learn and change. And it's through these interconnections and conversations that we can really grow and evolve. But what I'm worried about, even in this medium, is, 80 some odd % of all communication is nonverbal. I don't know if I'm picking up on, what all of your little nonverbal traces that might be saying, oh, that guy's crazy, or, oh, yes, I agree. And of course, the visitors, there's it's just a few, the reduction of 140 characters. I also think it's really, I believe in sort of that it's important for us to know how to self-regulate a conversation, meaning we can actually have a sense of what our emotions are just by talking to each other. And that happens really by the prosody of your voice, the sound and rhythm of your voice, and the facial expressions. And even now, I'm concerned, like, what connectivity issues might be impacting the way that you decode my facial expressions. One of the questions that Paolo asked us is, "What are you reading lately?" And I'm so deep in Stephen Porges' theories on polyvagal theory and trying to understand how changes in the brain are changing the way that people learn and what I should be doing as a teacher. So there's so much gained and so much learned.
Mark, your facial expressions,
binary.
Mark, because we are experiencing a little bit of scattering for the video images, can you turn off your video so we will be able to hear you? Just to let you conclude, if you turn off just the video, maybe the audio will be much more smoothly.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's very scattering. Keep going. Right. Mark?
Well, I
much
just
better,
think
much
that,
better.
That
yes,
is
absolutely.
that better? Good deeds are usually wrought with a great risk, right? Like, so we're all, in order to do good, we actually have to engage in risky behavior. And remember, our primal brains are really biased to lessen anxiety, stay balanced, process information, and interconnect, which is another way of saying properly integrate with each other and society as a whole. And I really feel like this is a time when our primal brains are reactive and not really able to sort of dampen down that anxiety and stay balanced. Remember, the brain is a social organ, and we need, to stimulate our social instincts. And so it's important to connect with people, to be social with each other, and to have these conversations where you hear and you see each other's sort of facial expressions, nonverbal communication, and eye movements.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great point in this sense, and I think that there is time now for digging deeper into our comments from our folks at home. So I would be very happy to bring our folks in the discussion. We have a few comments from Bernadette, for instance. She's saying, Marty, there's a discussion going on. This is the beauty of, I think, our live multitasking streaming, because while we are talking and sharing our thoughts, our folks, you all actually are keeping discussing among you, and this is great. And yes, so it's a collection of groups pages. They were talking about left book. I think you, Jesse, know more about left book. I guess.
Mon ami. It was suggested, I believe, by Bernadette that I was making a commercial for Left Book,
Let me see.
Which I must say, no, not at all. I have no affiliations, no membership.
Yeah.
I'm a Groucho Marxist. I will not join any club that will have me. Which isn't to say that right now is a crucial time for labor organizing. And for example, the meat processing plants in North America are in dire situation, in part because people there work in such close proximity that it has allowed breakouts to occur because of people transmitting COVID-19 between them. And because the North American meat supply depends upon these workers in these facilities, it's put a lot of pressure on them in terms of their jobs. So if there ever was a time to say, yes, we need unions, and unions brought us the weekend, and labor organizing needs to be a central part of our society, I will make that call. But I do not under any circumstances endorse the use of Facebook. So if people are using Facebook to organize, fine, that's cool, but I'm not broadcasting any commercial for that. Thank you very much.
I see. I appreciate your honest thoughts about this. And so, Phil, what's your? I'm sorry. By the way, it's 9:25, so we have about 30 minutes for taking your questions at home, my friends and folks from the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group, the YouTube channel. So please blast your comments, and now or never. So this is the time for sharing your thoughts briefly. Possibly briefly, so I can pick them all and put it into our stream. Phil, what's your take on the left book?
I'm not quite sure about the left book and what it is. I was actually going to respond to what Donna was talking about in terms of, because I think it goes back to the quote I chose from McLuhan to guide our discussion a little bit, or to be included in our discussion. And that's: the human dialogue is and must ever be the basic form of all civilization. For the dialogue compels each participant to see and recreate his own vision through another sensibility. So it's interesting because it seems like what Donna was describing really is kind of the Enlightenment vision of how, modern liberal societies are supposed to function. And obviously the dialogue and its importance back to antiquity, Socratic dialogue, and in the Middle Ages too. But I think, some people have questioned the degree to which that is a workable or viable reality. And to some extent, at least from the Enlightenment perspective, it's because, we imagine people as being these rational actors. And of course, none of us are solely rational creatures at all. And I think that's where the McLuhan quote gets in, where you're, creating your own vision through another sensibility. That sensibility, of course, includes not just the senses, but the life of feeling, the emotions that Mark was talking about. So I guess I'd like to raise the question about just how much dialogue can be successful in a world where things are so polarized, where a president at least since the 2000s, never really tries to get votes from the other side. They're just trying to talk to their own crowd. And so I wonder the degree to which the thoughts about how public dialogue works is to take place and to be meaningful in the future.
Well, that's I'm sorry. That's
go
the
ahead.
challenge. That's the challenge. Okay. I read something, oh my God, I think it was back in the 1990s, by Deborah Tannen, about how we are by nature agonistic. We live in an argument culture. Yeah, we're hardwired to argue. Yes, I am. No, you're not. And what mitigates that? To some degree, education. Except even education is kind of breaking down into, I just want to go to a liberal school. Yes, but I want to go to a conservative school. At the beginning of every semester, I always tell my students, don't believe a word I say. And of course, they all look at me like, what? Did you just say you're a liar? I'm like, no, I don't want you coming from the domain of belief. I'm just Auntie Donna, you know? I mean, I'm just a former DJ who reinvented herself and got a PhD when she was 64. Do I sound smarter now? You tell me. But the point is, don't believe. That's how we all get in trouble. Take a look at what I say. Listen to what I say. Take a look at, because I do a lot of writing and, you know, this and that. But listen to what I say. Do the research. Fact check me. As long as you're courteous, I'm fine with people disagreeing with me. It doesn't ruin my life at all. The people I have a problem with are the ones that are like, gotcha, found you doing something wrong. Yeah. You know, it's like, what? Come on, sandbox, give me a break. But when students look at the readings that I give them, and I try to give them stuff from both sides of various and sundry issues, and I try to get them to decide for themselves. There's a line in a Rush song. Well, of course, I had to give you a line from a Rush song. There's a line from Free Will that says, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. So if you choose to not engage, if you choose to just believe, you still have made a choice. I prefer that my students decide whether they want to agree with me or not, but not because I'm the professor and they'll fail if they don't. I've never failed a student for disagreeing with me. I have failed them for not being able to prove their point, giving me no reason for it, doing nothing but an extended rant. It's like, this ain't blogging, kids. So we as professors, it seems to me, whether we're on social media or whether we're on a live stream or wherever we may be, we have more opportunity to get people to consider critical thinking. But we also have more responsibility because we're living in a time where critical thinking isn't being privileged, it seems to me. It's being torn down. And yeah, it's much easier to be around people that agree with me and tell me I'm just swell. But as I said earlier, I never learn anything that way. So courtesy, critical thinking, it's all I get.
Donna, and everybody, I'm reminded of McLuhan's statement in reporting understanding media, and I think, at least to my knowledge, it may be the only place he ever mentions the thought. And he says, is it possible that the liberal is a man of the eye? I'm speaking in McLuhan terms, the man of the eye, and the conservative is the man of the ear. And so if you're talking about dealing with students, those are people you're training to some extent, at least, to be people of the eye. What do you think of that idea? And then to what extent does our challenge then become addressing the people of the ear?
I'm not sure that that's still a valid construct today, because we see conservatives espousing things in the United States, at least, that they never would have espoused before. We see conservatives defending, for example, points of view that would have been anathema to Ronald Reagan or Dwight D. Eisenhower, even Nixon. Nixon was in favor of establishing the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Our president doesn't believe in climate change. Republicans used to be upset by that. Republicans used to be like, oh yeah, we have an intellectual tradition. Now, I may not have agreed with their intellectual tradition, but that's okay. At least they had one. Now, it doesn't seem to me that there's as much thought and there's a lot of feeling. It's like, I feel like this is right, and it's right because our leader said so. I remember, gee, it was a long time ago, the 80s. I remember when there were various strands of republicanism, when there were pro-business Republicans, pro-religion Republicans, libertarian Republicans, where there were various strands, where there were intellectual magazines. All joking aside, whether you agreed or disagreed, there was a tradition of intellectualism. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's gone today. I'm not saying that at all. There are absolutely some intellectuals who are Republicans. I am a big fan of a website called The Dispatch, which has some of the best conservative thought out there today. I'm also a big fan of The Bulwark, Bulwark, which also has some really good intellectual thought from the right. But by and large, many of the arguments I'm hearing just seem like know-nothingism. They just seem like anti-science, anti-this, anti-that. I'm not used to it. I'm not saying people on the left are all perfect and swell. We've got our crazies too. But my point is, I'm not sure that what McLuhan thought were the distinctions back then would hold as much today because of the erosion of intellectual thought on the right.
But that sounds to me like what you're saying is actually supporting what McLuhan's saying, is that they're getting further away from a literary, intellectual kind of disposition, even more towards the, AM talk radio style conservative media in the U.S.
Well, and if I might tie this back to a question that came from the audience earlier, who was wondering about the role of TikTok, and where TikTok, which is the fastest growing social media platform, and notably the first social media platform in North America owned by a Chinese company, which changes the geopolitical nature of these not really commons, not really public space, but the users perceive them as commons and as public space. And TikTok is a very oral culture. Partly because its time frame is so short, partly because it's a lot about lip syncing. So it's making jokes based on the lyrics or based on and TikTok is also a fantastic example of automated media production. Because, to Donna's point, if we are to be nostalgic, I remember when making media was cumbersome. Like when it required skills and expensive equipment, and it was not something anyone could do. The means of production were held by very few people, versus we take for granted that we now live in a world where we're doing a global broadcast and none of us had to pay money for it. And TikTok automates production in a way. It uses AI and it uses machine learning in such an accessible way that anyone can make very powerful media. And I think to go to this eye-ear notion, it is very much the ear, in that it's driven by a very oral culture. It's full of misinformation. It's full of, it's almost overwhelmingly defiant of public health guidelines. It's mostly people showing off that they're flouting and people talking how pissed off they are at the current situation. But it, I think, offers an opportunity to get an accurate metric of where people are at. I spend a lot of time on TikTok because I feel that it's giving me a signal amidst the noise that feels a lot more credible than what I would get from CBC. And it goes back to my point about how I wish more public health people were doing. But I did see in the chat that a lot of students, medical students, are being told, hey, get on TikTok, figure that stuff out. So there's hope. We have reason to believe that the tide is shifting. But I think it brings back to what we've all been saying about critical thinking and media literacy and the role that it plays in an accelerated culture and an accelerated environment that, suggests what we should be encouraging rather than what we should be discouraging. And that's where the Fox News effect, to your point about the Republican Party, is amplifying a narrow wedge of republicanism. But that narrow wedge is forcing out all the others. And as a result, we're not getting the dialogue. We're not getting the kind of a political environment that's conducive to democracy.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. Not because it was Chinese. It could have been owned by somebody from Dubai. My point is, most people don't realize how corporate the media are. They think that, oh my God, I got all these channels, I got all these networks, I got all of these whatevers. And the truth is they're all owned by 6 companies. And that's one of the reasons why you rarely see, for example, critiques of the excesses of capitalism, or why you rarely see discussion of workers' rights or things of that nature. And yeah, sure, everybody can have a YouTube account, everybody can spread misinformation, everyone can wear sunscreen, et cetera, et cetera. But are we better informed? Are we better informed? I suggest to you that there's a lot of people invested in making sure that we're not. And if they can overwhelm us with BS, then they win, because they can just step right in. And, so this is where the power of critical thinking is essential. But I'm not sure.
But on a personal level, Donna, don't you think you're better informed?
No. I think I'm better informed.
I think I'm better informed. I don't think the populace is better informed.
No, I'm talking about.
But I think me individually, I'm doing way better now than I ever have been in the previous decades of my life.
Okay.
But informed about what, Jesse? Informed about what? I mean, informed about the health risks, informed about the risks of privacy. If we agree that contact tracing is an important measure, informed
about that particular subject for several weeks.
Support, like how much Lady Gaga has given, like all of this is relative, and we have to have those critical literacy skills to know what's important information. And it also is like, if you're someone who doesn't leave your house and you don't see people, then the pandemic is not important information to you, because you're already so insulated.
Not referring to you personally.
So, I think it's really important that
I'm not when I say I don't feel like I'm informed, I mean I as in the average person. I, Donna, probably am as informed now as I ever was. I still subscribe to a multitude of magazines. I still subscribe to a multitude of newspapers. I still watch and listen and read, but I've always been like that. I'm talking about my students. My students think, and these are some of the nicest people. I'm not dissing my students. I'm saying, by and large, yeah, they're on TikTok, or they're on FaceTime, or they're on whatever. They want it short, they want it quick, they want it to the point. If it has music to it, so much the better. And in terms of like reading a long article, attention span, there was an article way back, I think in 2003, is Google making us stupid? It eventually became the book, The Shallows. I don't believe Google is making us stupid, but I do believe we've turned into a culture where, like Postman predicted, there's so much distraction that, yeah, I think the average person has so much stuff coming at them that, no, they don't feel more informed. They just have more stuff. But digging through the stuff it's kind of our job. Our job is to kind of like help them dig through the stuff.
Postman would have called this information glut. And I would still say, Donna, some of your students might look at you and say, that woman is not informed. She doesn't know what's happening in the world.
I've read their exams.
It's, I've now been teaching for 30 years, and I think that I'm the same age as my first year students, because I've been teaching first year students for that long. But the truth is, I don't understand their worlds, and I don't know if they'll ever understand mine. Remember that focused attention is a learned behavior, and we can learn how to teach focused attention. And it's going to become increasingly important as we move into online learning environments. How do we maintain focus, and how do we promote those cognitive behaviors that lead to feeling informed, as you define it? It's still all very unknown and vague.
And that was partially my point. We're living in uncertain times, and people react to uncertainty in a multitude of different ways. Some people attach themselves to someone or something that gives them the answer, whether it's religion, whether it's a political leader, whether it's a cause, whatever. Other people kind of live in the uncertainty and they're just kind of like, oh, okay, let's see what we can learn from this. There are people that are just trying to navigate it and they're feeling really out of balance and really unsettled, surrounded by all of this stuff coming at them. And I really feel like my students, for all of their understanding of stuff, they may not understand as much as they think they do. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just think that to some degree, we're all kind of on the adventure. And yeah, I'm real clear that I don't understand their world. And I'm real clear that they don't understand mine. And that's okay. That's why we're there. That's why we can learn from each other. There's nothing wrong with not understanding. There's a lot wrong in believing you don't need to understand. And that's what bothers me about some of our internet culture. So, well, I'm not talking to you, you know. So, well, why not? I gotta say, I am so grateful. This is gonna sound awful. I am so grateful to be here having this conversation. And I'll tell you why. I'm 73, okay? Still young and cute, but 73. In the 73 years that I've been around, I've seen a lot of people tell me that because I was female, what I had to say didn't matter. Or because I was a Jew, nobody cared about what Jews have to say. Or because I was a feminist, well, those are all people that hate men, and, you know, tell that to my husband. But the point is, we tend to be reductionist about certain things. And I've lived in a world where, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. And yet I did. And yet I did. And yet I did. And to be sitting around with people who know a heck of a lot more than I do, and to be able to engage in conversation with them like equals, that's not something I ever would have imagined back in the 1950s. So thank you for including me in your space. I hope I'm making sense. I'm trying my best here. But the truth is, a lot of times when I'm talking to, like, you know, people that have a lot more education than I do, I feel like a fraud. I feel like an imposter. Okay. I feel like, oh my God, I'm just a kid from the streets of Dorchester. I'm just a rock and roll DJ. Okay. But the truth is, I keep learning. I keep learning. I never stop. Like I said, I got my PhD when I was 64. I always want to learn new things. And being with you guys, new spaces are opening up. And I hope they're opening up for some of the people that are watching. I hope there's people watching going, never thought of it that way. Or, yeah, categorically don't agree. But let me think about it. You know, those kinds of things are magical. And I would hate to lose them. I would hate to lose the power of good conversation.
Yep. Great. It reminds
Well,
me.
you know, in oral culture,
Sorry,
yeah.
Mark. I'm
Go
just
ahead,
reading the idea that in McLuhan's words, I don't necessarily agree with everything I say, questioning and without taking for granted, right? The idea of exploring and the explorations and the way we learn and the way we adjust ourselves to the current changes in our environment, in our scenario, and we are now 2020 experiencing one of the biggest changes in society, the idea of adjusting without taking for granted what's around us. Mark, sorry, you are going ahead, right? Go ahead.
I, you know, McLuhan's point around "I don't explain, I explore" has been so meaningful to me, and I honestly don't think I can explain what's happening in the world or explain the health messaging any better than the next person. I'm not a medical health expert. However, I do know a great deal about media messaging and primary and secondary oral cultures, and we've had a lot of discussion about binary thinking, and I would like just point out Walter Ong's work on the orality is literacy. You know, his psychodynamics of orality really in part capture what is
We
happening on a medium like TikTok. I mean, certainly it's agonistically toned. You don't need dictionaries. They're situational.
I see,
It's
Mark. We are losing your signal, so basically
not
it's scattering.
abstract.
So we almost lost you.
And if it
yeah,
is
no,
like
Mark,
an oral
Mark.
trip, but it is
We
still
lost
something
you.
different.
I'll see if the connection may work better. But I have an idea. Got an idea, because we are 10 minutes away. In order to let Mark's spirit and feelings inspire our final conversations, I wanted to screen a very short video Mark sent me. I think it's a kind of video homage he made for his friends. I'll screen there's a 1 minute video to inspire a final merry-go-round, the final remarks from you all, my friends. And so Mark has a chance to, in a different way, maybe in a more artistic, poetic way, inspire our final remarks for tonight. So enjoy. There's a very short 1 minute clip on Mark's feelings on the quarantine.
My name is Mark. What have you got to say? Video man. I wrote a book about video man. My name is Mark. I wrote a book about a future seer. I'm a storyteller. A future seer. Short video make. Finds I'm a storyteller. Mark I'm a short video maker. I'm a short video maker. A future video maker appears.
Shut off. Select to speak.
So a response from for my friends from Mark Lipton, and so I like the idea that is a kind of a visual storytelling shared with all of us. So thank you, Mark, for sharing this. So, and I see Donna clapping. So final merry-go-round. Let's start. Phil, Jesse, Donna, and then we'll see if Mark can get into the microphone. So, Phil, your final remarks. It was a very engaging discussion today. I couldn't actually play my role and to moderate because thank you. It was very, very engaging. So, Phil, what's your final take? Your final remark?
Well, I guess I'm still consumed with the concern about how we as a community everywhere, because the politics are similarly, it seems, very polarized everywhere. I'm left with the concern about how that's going to, in a big macro cultural way, go forward productively. And I, to one extent, I mean, I guess I'd just throw my thinking about our understanding about ideologies and whatnot, and even the idea of ideology, I would say, is McLuhan was fond of saying that alphabetic literacy divorced the subject from the object and divorced thought from feeling. And in a way that we think about people's worldviews, I'm very interested in a guy named Sylvan Tompkins, as an American personality theorist. I wrote a paper on him some years back called Sylvan Tompkins as a Media Ecologist. But he talks about how what we talk about as ideologies are actually, in his words, what he describes as idioaffective postures. So it recognizes the degrees to which our emotions play a role in our ideological perspectives. And I'm wondering if, we start to think about ideology a little bit more in reality than the way we, thought of it as literates, as this kind of just collection of ideas. That it's a good kind of step forward to, I think, understanding that ideologies are actually more like what Tompkins calls idioaffective postures. The other thing about ideologies, which I think is very interesting and which I think could increase our understanding of them as well. I just reread a book that I had read a couple of decades ago. I don't know if anybody is familiar with it, but it's called Born to Rebel: Birth Order, Family Dynamics, and Creative Lives. And it talks about how birth order is one of and it's the interesting thing about this book, it's very media ecological without making reference to any media ecologists. But what it's ecologically about is the ecology of the family unit and the dynamics of birth order in that unit. And the finding tends to be that the more conservative kinds of individuals tend to be the firstborns, whereas latterborns tend to be more progressive. The book in the end is sort of basically talks about history as being, in a macro kind of sense, a form of sibling rivalry. So I think that in that concern about the polarizations and trying to understand the dispositions of the people who are polarized and trying to know about some of the things that are going into the way we think and feel, I wonder, and I'll just probe away, wondering about how, our understandings of ideologies and idioaffective postures may be able to shed some light on resolving this kind of polarized situation, which could only end poorly.
Yeah. This is a great point. I think we will be back in the following weeks to this point, Phil, and thank you. Before giving the floor to Jesse, I wanted to share a comment, a response to Mark Lipton's response. So the idea from Bob, hello Bob. Bob Log, in addition to secondary literacy, Mark, there is also tertiary orality or secondary literacy. So the idea that the way writing is transformed by online communication, online literacy has a strong oral character to it. And indeed, tonight we've been exploring the this kind of oral exchange, right? An oral exchange. Also, let me share a comment from Mark through our chat. Great having conversations with you folks. Please stay in touch, stay well, stay home, wear a mask in public, have compassion. I like the idea of retrieving compassion in today's world, the self and others. So there are unprecedented times. The universe is solar. So thank you, Mark, for sharing. We step out from orality to literacy, actually. So we are reading your words and making sense of it and making sense of them. So your final remark, Jesse.
I'm like to believe that ideology is no longer as relevant as pedagogy. And when I think of one of the more, to your point about the impact of whether someone's the oldest child or the middle child, I've been thinking a lot lately about all the young people who, rather than be at school, they're at home. And it's a revolutionary act to tell a child that perhaps school is not mandatory, and allow them to actually spend their time as they see fit. And in fact, a lot of them are spending that time playing video games. And what's interesting is that if you think of the commons that exist now as our parliaments, I would argue that the politicians of the future are YouTubers today. And the political power of a YouTuber is that they're a pedagogue, not an ideologue. They don't have ideas for the future, but they would like to teach you how to play the video game that they like, which is that they're almost a real-time pedagogue in that they're literally teaching you what they're learning as they learn it. So in that sense, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about the future because I love to think that pedagogy would be more relevant as to who forms political power than ideology, because it reflects both the uncertainty of the times that we live in, but also the need for learning to be the central ethos of both ourselves as individuals and collectively as a democratic society. So yeah, we are going to have to, fight some crazy surveillance authoritarian panopticon rising. But I actually do believe that we have the ground forces, the grassroots, when it comes to the types of students and learners across the country are ready to play whatever video game that we ask of them.
Yeah, thank you. I like your good vibes and optimism in this call to action. I'll say it's really a call to action. So thank you very much, Jesse. And finally, Donna, what's your final remarks for tonight's?
First of all, as somebody who is the oldest child in my family and is the one, I think, liberal in my family, progressive, whatever. It's funny how these things turn out, because I don't think I ever saw a feminist growing up. I don't think I saw a businesswoman. I grew up in a very gendered, very traditional society. I knew I didn't want to have kids from the time I was 4. I mean, I don't know. I just turned out weird, I guess. But maybe there's a message in that. Maybe the message is, be yourself, be true to yourself, whatever that looks like. And maybe there's no one book that has the magic answer. Maybe you have to find a whole bunch of books, or maybe there's no magic answer. On my website on Facebook, and I basically use Facebook very sporadically, but it's there. But it has a quote from the Talmud. I used to be a chaplain, what can I say? And it's from Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of our ancestors. And I guess if nothing else, I'm sort of a Levinasian, the late great Emmanuel Levinas, who said ethics must be first philosophy. Ethics must come first. So I guess I start with that. I guess I start with ethics. And the quote says, "You are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you expected to walk away from it." So I'd love to end prejudice in our lifetime. I really would. Okay, I've seen enough of it. I'd like to end prejudice in our lifetime. But the fact that I'm probably not going to be able to, I can't use that as an excuse to not even try. So sometimes maybe all I can do is just keep my own space clear. Sometimes maybe I can just model ethics in my own life. Maybe people will get it, maybe they won't. Maybe I'll make a mistake. Maybe I'll have to tell the truth about that and kind of try to fix it. But every day, you got to just keep reinventing it, recreating it. Like I said, maybe there isn't a magic answer, but maybe there's some magical questions. And if we keep asking them, maybe we'll find where we're supposed to be and put ethics first.
Very well said. Very well said, Donna. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jess is back and Mark is back. Mark, very, very briefly, we tend to really close the timely, so 10 p.m. So your very, very final remarks for Mark.
Well, as iron sharpens iron, Donna, the Talmud taught me the scholar sharpens the scholar. And so our conversations, whether we're talking with each other or talking online with each other, this is a great honor, and it helps keep me on top of my game. So I'm really grateful, Paolo, to you and to everyone. What an interesting experience, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
I virtually hug you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I wanted to thank all the folks on Facebook and YouTube channels. You know, even from YouTube, they are suggesting why don't you could get Douglas Copeland for the. Why not? So if you help me reach him out, so I will. I will. And by the way, on July the 20th, there will be July the 20th. It will be the last one. It will be a global village day. It's gonna be a Monday night. Marathon all across the world. We will conclude this series of Monday night webinars with a kind of global village day, a kind of marathon all across the world to celebrate the PandeMedia. So making sense of this state of emergency and looking beyond, find our answers or questioning or keeping fostering critical thinking as we discussed tonight. I want to thank again our marvelous guest speakers and friends and colleagues tonight: Phil Rose, Jesse Hirsh, Donna Halper, and Mark Lipton. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
you
Paolo.
all, my
Thank you,
friends at
Paolo.
home. We'll see you next Monday as usual, 8 p.m. There are many other comments from Facebook. And so, yes, stay safe and stay sage. Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.